You know, some mornings you wake up and you're feeling a little off and the world just kind of loses its luster. Those days, I find it important to have around me reminders of how I am actually fortunate enough to live in the age of miracles and wonders. Think about it. In my pocket, I carry a supercomputer that does everything from act as my wake up alarm in the morning to turn on my lights in the office, which is actually in my garage because I live in the era of working from home. And that uses electromagnetic waves broadcast in the air to connect me with the ever growing repository of all human knowledge from any place at any time. We've gotten here over thousands of years because of makers. Those amongst us whose relief valve is to imagine what the future can look like and then make the time and gather the resources to make it happen. Create something powerful like a network to share vast amounts of information with the world. Create something beautiful like a new form of art that will mesmerize and inspire. Or build something vital like a literacy or STEM education program that lifts people up so that they too may grow in the world they live in. Here's to the makers who can take a look at a pile of stuff and see possibilities, who turn nothing into something that ultimately enriches all of us. Kelly Cheatle is a materials and process maven who specializes in visual storytelling and innovation. She is the Artistic Director of Airigami, a creative firm that specializes in colossal, experiential, and dimensional illustrative projects built from modeling balloons. Along with her husband and partner Larry Moss, she leads teams of artists and community volunteers to construct ephemeral installations that enchant diverse audiences of all ages. Their unique fine art and award-winning illustration work has been showcased around the world. Hey, Kelly, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much.
Tell the audience a little bit about what you do.
Well, what time is it? Because that answer varies based on what time of the day or week or month it is. But right now, I am currently an artist. I am a maker. I am a thinker. When I go home, I'm a mom. I'm just someone who gets stuff done or gets lost in stuff that she should be getting done. So that's who I am.
Okay. You are the artistic director also for a company called Airigami.
Yes.
What does Airigami do?
So Airigami specializes in large-scale installations, fine art illustrations, and commercial illustrations and stop-motion animation entirely out of balloons.
Oh, neat. You do stop motion animation as well?
Oh, we do a little bit of everything. Generally, the Airigami stuff focuses around the balloons as the medium, but we kind of see what happens and what we need to do. We've also played with food before.
That's kind of cool. So, how big is a large scale installation?
Ooh, the largest pieces that we've done can be as tall as 40 or 50 feet in height. Um, you know, at least that much, and like talking like actually probably longer than that. Probably 60 feet tall. Now that I think about it.
Wow.
Um, and like we filled up entire mall atriums with multi-level sculptures. We've done uh, quarter scale models of space shuttles. We've
Huh.
done huge immersive installations. It really runs the gamut.
Very cool. These are all commercial contracts. I mean, I don't know. Does anybody do balloon art for the sake of doing balloon art?
That's always hard to say. Um, Most of the time, we are hired by a company or maybe a civic group to create a piece,
Okay.
generally to get people excited and get them all together. Um, but sometimes there are pieces that are made, out of love and inspiration versus just, financial, paying the bills sort of
Yeah.
things.
Are these all like, do you fill all these balloons with helium? Do you use just regular air? I mean, I guess explain a little bit about the art form itself and what it's like. Because I've seen we take a bunch of balloons and we make an arch kind of
Yeah.
thing. But
Yes.
I've looked at your website and I've seen some of the really amazing stuff that you've got listed up there, and I'd love to understand the process a little bit more.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. I would suggest that, after you're intrigued by this podcast, that you go check out our website at arigami.com.
Yeah.
AIR. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll put it. No, it'll be
I,
in the show notes as well. So I promise.
um, so what we do is we create artwork using primarily latex balloons, but occasionally we do use foil balloons. I've actually been playing with those a bit, and now I've sort of accidentally become a bit of an industry expert in modifying and manipulating foil balloons.
Huh.
um, but we combine multiple smaller balloons into large scale sculptures. So a lot of it's similar in a way to basket weaving and fabric making, and also garment making. The way
Okay.
that we use the balloons, because you have to put together smaller pieces to make larger flat or curved panels that are then shaped into larger structures.
Okay. So you have to have a little bit of architecture in your background, right? You have to understand how to build a building, right? Or how to at least build a structure.
Yeah,
Um,
there was a lot of sewing and cloth and soft sculpture in my background. It's kind of funny
okay.
because one of the first projects I started working on with my now husband Larry, who's my partner, he started the business. He was doing large scale sculptures and other pieces for decades before I came along. God, that makes him sound really old. He's not that old. Although I like to tell him he's that old. But it, balloon dresses, I'm sure folks have seen some of those before. So this was like maybe a decade ago, where balloon dresses were just starting to become a thing, and he got invited to a fashion show and was like, "Oh, Larry, we want you to make a balloon dress." And my husband, ever the nerd, like, I can't do this without, I don't have a fundamental understanding of how dresses are made. Like, I need to know that first. I need to know how fabric moves. But thankfully, since I had a little bit of that in my background, the two of us worked together and, you know, recognize the pieces and parts that go into making a dress, and then how do you translate that into being made out of little tiny air-filled sausages,
Yeah.
and still have it flow and move the way that a real dress would. So that's one of the first projects that we got to do. Most people start with a dog. I started with a ball gown.
That's funny. That's fascinating. As I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so you have to be able to build structures that can flow and move like cloth, and then
Hmm.
you also have to build structures that are so massively large that they have to be rigid enough to stand up, right,
Hmm.
on their own. And I don't know that I could come up with ways to do that. It's just amazing to think about it and to think about building that kind of stuff and the creativity that goes into it. So that's very
Well, the
cool.
the nerd part of me loves that sort of thing, because I mean, you'd be surprised at how many places balloons show up in, not necessarily the squeaky toy balloons, but like the, inflated devices show up in our lives and in our like scientific exploration. It's great because they pack so small until you fill them with air.
Yeah.
So they use balloon architecture or engineering on the space shuttle. They use
Yeah.
balloon engineering to, get to the little corners of your heart sometimes.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things we do.
Yeah. Being I'm not a physical engineer, being a computer engineer though, engineering is all about looking at a problem and then coming up with creative ways to solve it, right? And
Hmm.
whether it's using physical laws or whatever, it's just figuring it out. And I, I just I'm just imagining how much fun it is actually to walk into a room, look at the drawing of what you're trying to create, and go, okay, now how the hell am I going to do this? And then experimenting around with different materials and all of that. So that's just truly awesome. Do you work out of home or do you have like a warehouse kind of thing? How does the business run?
So we have a studio in downtown Rochester. It's about
Okay.
3,000 square feet.
Okay.
And it's divided out. Right now, it's kind of a it's been a year, so it's not as
Yeah.
divided out as it was.
Okay.
But we've got a large area for building the big structures, for photographing them, and doing some of that video work. And we've got an office area, and we also have a little bit of a maker space set up, because a
Okay.
lot of what we do, there's not really equipment for what we do, so we end up building a lot of the things that
Yeah.
we need to make something happen.
Okay. So here you are, you have your business, you're building these large balloon structures for events and things like that. and then COVID came along and kind of shut everything down. Do you have how many people work as part of your business? Is it just you and your husband, or do you have other people?
Currently, it's mostly my husband and myself, and we
Yeah.
have some people that we're starting to bring back. From a purely selfish business perspective, prior to COVID dropping in the U.S., things were really things were really going well. Like
Yeah.
we had a full time assistant office manager, we had a full time or two part time office assistants, like just to help with general production and following me around so that when I inevitably drop something that I'm in the middle of working on, they put it away. And
Yeah.
they're not here anymore, which is really hard.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you have so you had to shut the whole facility down? Did all of, was there still any? I guess probably not. Was there any call for the product during the early parts of the pandemic?
Well, so as soon as we got word of actually, it was interesting. So we probably caught wind of something going on faster than, or at least the intensity of what was coming. We were more aware of sooner because we've got friends all over the globe who are in this job, and
Yeah.
their calendars were instantly emptied. Like we went from having an entirely full calendar for 2021 to
Yeah.
having it completely empty in less than a week.
Mm.
Uh, we had and rightly so. Like I am not, when it came down to this, I was, as soon as I kind of like took a look at what was going on and understood even the beginnings of the scope of this, I was just like, shut it down,
Yeah.
shut the whole damn thing down, everybody stay in your house, and if we just all buckle down and do this, we'll be
Yeah.
fine. But if we don't pay attention, we're gonna be where we
Yeah.
are now.
Yeah. Certainly made it all take a lot longer. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah,
Um, and what did you do during the course of the year to keep yourself from going insane and just feeling
yeah.
useful?
So at first, once we got over the initial shock, it was like,
Yeah.
okay, so what's next? Like what's needed? Because
Yeah.
yes, there's thankfully we have enough. Let's just say that, so that
Yeah.
that way, while this was terrible, it was not. We still had a roof over our head and food on our plate.
Right.
So once you have that, then you start looking outward and figuring out. Well, at least for me, like
Yeah.
who needs what. So, seeing that there were shortages of masks, seeing that there were shortages of PPE, and being a nerdy maker type person. And I think the callous recommendation of a bandana, I think,
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
bandana if you don't have anything else. It was like,
Yeah.
that I think that was a call to arms for a lot of maker type people. So I started, designing simple to sew masks and also simple to no sew masks, so that way people had something to cover their faces with that was, slightly better than a bandana.
Okay.
Um, the other thing I did was I recognized that, part of the work that we do, it's not just building a giant thing out of balloons. It's really about creating wonder and getting people together,
Yeah.
and recognizing that that was the exact opposite of what we needed at the time, but we still as humans need that connection. So it was trying to figure out what are ways that we can stay connected together but separately.
Yeah.
So I made a little online antisocial art show where I encouraged people to stay at home, and this was at the very beginning too, and use whatever art supplies you happen to have on hand to make something, and
Okay.
then share it with a hashtag, and we'll all make something together, but separately.
That's
uh,
cool.
yeah, which is cool. We got like 400 at least entries last count. So that was kind of fun. And then we also did I made a little sheet that someone could print out that had, it was just like a little "Hey neighbor" card,
Okay.
because how often, I mean, there's some folks live in neighborhoods where everybody knows everybody and their kids are all playing in the backyard, but
Yeah.
not everybody does. And so the little card was a little Mad Lib that somebody could fill and be like, "Hi, my name is Kelly. I live next door at 123 Main Street. If here's my phone number. If you need anything, call. I can go, run an errand or
Nice.
whatever." And then that way, it's not like, it kind of takes some of that awkwardness of like, "Hi, I've lived next to you for 5 years, but we haven't said anything."
Yeah. That's my that's my world. I grew up in New York City, so I lived in an apartment building complex of like 4 6-story buildings, and
Mm,
I knew people on. I knew like maybe 15 of the neighbors
Mhm.
out of all of it. My entire time growing up, it was just the way it was. So
Yeah.
I like that idea. So how many masks did you wind up? Did you produce masks or did you just produce plans for masks?
Well, so here we are now. So I'm more. I think the way that my brain works, I'm more focused on coming up with a design and
Yeah.
coming up or a reproducible design, not necessarily in the production.
Yeah.
So my job that I took on was designing the a mask that had pretty comprehensive coverage. There were several masks actually. One that
Yeah.
had pretty comprehensive coverage that was a sewn piece. And I worked with a couple people across the country just virtually designing that and testing that out.
Yeah.
Then I worked on a mask that had a clear panel in it because I thought the next thing that was going to come up was that people didn't have the ability to see each other's emotions or let alone lip read. Well,
My wife Dara, who introduced us, is hard of hearing. She has bilateral hearing aids. So yes, we there have been many occasions in the last year where we really wished that the clear masks were more widely available.
yeah. So the latest version of that was actually a vacuum formed uh, mask that we've been designing over the last year from that
Okay.
panel, which now is ready for production. Even though the some folks keep saying, "Oh, well, we don't need them anymore." I'm like, there are still people who would benefit from
Yeah.
being able to have a clear mask in situations where you need to have a surgical mask. So
Yeah.
we're still going forward with that little be clear.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it may be quieting down here in the States, but there's a lot of the rest of the world that's still in pretty serious trouble right now
right.
that we need to continue to help.
Well, and in other situations, there are times where prior to COVID, where you would be in a situation where someone would have a surgical mask on. So
Yeah.
rather than having to drop it down to communicate with you,
Yeah.
you'll be able to access one of those. So
Yeah.
sometimes the benefits of adversity.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. It'd be great to see something like that show up in hospitals more as well, right? So that when you're talking to the doctor or the surgeon prior to the surgery, you can actually understand what they're saying more clearly.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm There's a part of me that deeply hopes that all of the crazy stigma in the country that came on masks during this actually doesn't hold up in the long run, and that we get to a place where if you're sick in the middle of flu season, it's okay to break out a mask and wear it so that you don't give your flu to anybody else. Because as a culture, the way we work, we have this tendency of not laying down and resting when we get sick.
Hmm.
um, and I know from my experience, when you work in an office building with a constant recirculating air, patient one walks in, and before you're done, the entire building has gotten ill. So I love the idea of what like the Japanese and other Asian cultures did, where they figured it's a courtesy to wear a mask by default when you're not feeling well. I would love to see that take place here if we can get the people who thought masks were a political thing to kind of get their act together and realize it's not.
Well, we had a 98% reduction in seasonal flu last year.
Yeah.
They directly attribute to
Yeah.
the use of masks. So like that's thousands of people that we still, well, theoretically have
Mm-hmm.
did not succumb to the flu, and children that did not succumb to the flu.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's such a silly, simple thing to do. There's no
Yeah.
need to politicize it. It's just like we wear seatbelts now. Get
Yeah.
over it. Like,
Yeah. So Rochester's a small city north of New York City, right in New York State.
Mhm.
How has all of this played out there? What's the experience been like in a smaller city like that?
Um, I think it's so interesting to kind of look back at it now. I don't want to say post COVID. We're still, again, it's this sort of this plateau, this lull. Like it's wonderful to see those numbers from the local health department going down and down and staying down because people are getting vaccinated. Like
Yeah.
that's fantastic. There's still the part of me that played Pandemic Inc. that did all
Yeah.
sorts of like nerdy stuff in high school where you saw how easy it was to transmit something, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for, and I know this is like the anxious part of me. I'm just waiting for a variant that's able to
Yeah.
supersede a thing to kind
Yeah.
of throw us back into things. But that's my own personal like,
I'm
concern.
I play the same scenarios in my head. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll have a good summer, and I'm worried about the fall again, to be honest.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Because
yeah,
that would honestly, that would be, well, that would be terrible humanity wise.
yeah,
Business wise, another big hit like that would spell the end for a
yeah,
lot of businesses, because at that point it's going to be like, nope, I've played this game, I
yeah.
hustled the entire year, and I'm not doing it again.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm yes, you're absolutely right. I'm my biggest fear is if we do have another serious uptick, we will not be able to shut things down the way we did and lock down. People just won't do it, and so we'll start to see a greater hit on life and people's health. And a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of the shutdown and the extreme preparations that we had to do over the course of the last year were guided towards protecting the medical system, right? Because we had hospitals that just didn't have enough
mhm.
excess capacity to support this kind of a surge. And we still don't, right? We haven't solved that problem. And I don't know if we ever will, because that involves throwing money at something that doesn't necessarily, it's like an insurance policy, right? It doesn't return anything until you absolutely need it. But you want to go through your entire life without ever having to need it. You know what I mean?
it I mean, yes and no. I was just watching an interview with Jon Stewart, and he was lamenting that we weren't. He was hoping that, like, the 1918 flu pandemic, that there was something that people had suggested back then that was different than what we suggest now, then so he can, like, blame it on that we haven't learned anything. If
Yeah.
anything, the science is there. We understand the things you can do to prevent this. Like, the things
Yeah.
that you do to prevent this costs $1.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
doesn't cost like thousands of dollars in hospital infrastructure. It's the prevention. Once it's out,
Yeah.
like, that's the most foolish way to fix anything. Like, do you
Yeah.
let the toddler run around with the paints, or do you put
Yeah.
the paints away?
Yeah. You're
Like,
absolutely, absolutely right. Absolutely right. If people had just said, "Yeah, you know what? I'm going to grab that paper mask and I'm going to wear it," and if everybody had done that right from the very beginning, this would have been a totally different play out. But do you think people have learned enough and got? I mean, the country's a little crazy right now. A little
I
crazy.
I
It's a lot crazy. Do you?
I don't want to play into that meme.
Okay.
Like, yes and no, all at the same time.
Yeah.
I think people I think a person is smart. I think
Yeah.
people are dumb. Like, when it comes down to it,
Yeah.
because if you can connect to people on an individual level,
Yeah.
and you can convey the idea that this is not a political thing, this is a human thing. Like,
Yeah.
hey, there's this thing that could, if it doesn't kill you, make you feel really crappy for a few weeks, and
Yeah.
make it really hard for your family. And it's really catchy. And it's actually really simple for us not to be inconvenienced for a really long time if we
Yeah.
all just kind of do the same thing at the same time. Like, look at New Zealand. Look at New
Yeah.
Zealand. Oh
I know.
my
Yeah.
gosh. I love
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
My hero.
No. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Um, no, I'm with you. I've been preaching masks from the very beginning in my monologues up front at the start of the podcast,
Mhm.
and I'm so I live in Redondo Beach, California, which
Mm,
is sort of one of the kind of southern inside suburbs of LA. I mean, LA is this massive city that's basically totally unlike any other city on the east,
mhm,
which is a hub and spoke kind of thing. We're just massive spread, and some of the neighboring cities here by the beach, and some of the ones that are just to the south of us in like Orange County, had this big weird political reaction to masks, like it was their freedom was being infringed upon because they had to wear them. And it was incredibly frustrating because you just want to look at them and go, no, it's common sense and it's common courtesy. If I have a disease that passes through my spit and I spit on you all the time, there's a really good chance you're going to get sick, right? But if I wear something that covers me from spitting on you and you do the same for me, we're not going to get sick, are we? That's not a freedom issue. That's a common sense issue. But I, it's been living in a community like LA, which is both very liberal on one side and very conservative, ultra right in other parts. And watching the conflict every day in the middle of the street as like heads batting against each other has been, from a political science perspective, it's been fascinating to see people behave this way. And it's incredibly frustrating when you know that this is going to keep you locked in your house for another 3 months, right? We had a spike here that was pretty severe early on, right? Not as severe as New York City did, but around the same time, LA County had a very big spike. And then things quieted down during the summer. And I'm looking around going, okay, if we behave ourselves, we might get through this. And then it was, okay, let's all get together on the beach, and okay, let's start getting on airplanes, and and sure enough, the end of 2020, beginning of 2021 was as bad as it could possibly be, right? It was that refrigerated trucks behind the hospitals kind of situation in LA County, and it was totally preventable, right? Anybody who was paying attention to it was sitting there going, it didn't have to be this way. All we
Yeah,
had to do was behave.
these are the fruits that we've reaped, the seeds that we've planted. Like
Yeah.
a pandemic should never be politicized,
Yeah.
like, from the get go. So
Yeah.
that I mean, if you wanted to go through and Monday morning quarterback this, I could tell you 1,000 points where we could have done better.
Yeah.
My hope is that, God, I hope everybody's at least learned something. Whether
Yeah.
it's part of it was, it was a changing target. Part of it was trying to maintain access to the higher level of protection for medical staff that was going to be up close and personal with it
Yeah.
versus people that have a hoarding mentality.
Yeah.
It speaks to a lot of the it like pushed all of the buttons that America has when it comes to the things that we fight with, or our personal challenges, or
Yeah.
challenges in the US with the way that our fabulous individual mindset
Yeah.
goes. These are the
Yeah.
things that we don't excel at because we are very much driven by this, the sense of self as the individual.
Yeah.
I can do the thing myself, and it's like a pandemic is the exact opposite, where like my safety is completely reliant upon your willingness to cooperate.
Yeah. So that brings me a little bit back to where this trail started. So you live in a smaller city. Is there a tighter community there that responded differently and was more together, or did you have the same kind of separation and borderline craziness we saw in places like Los Angeles and maybe New York City?
I think I think it probably brought out the best and worst in people. I can point the things that I would point to are the positive ones, because that's the one that I thankfully am surrounded by.
Yeah.
Um, we had a pretty decent mutual aid network to begin with.
Okay.
As far as like people who are looking out for each other. Rochester's considered quote unquote one of the Rust Belt cities, so
Okay.
we've been hit by um, economic challenges for decades now, because the city was centered on three or four very large corporations that have since disinvested in our community.
Right.
So the only way we've gotten through that is with each other and
Okay.
being scrappy and being smart. Um, that's not to say that everybody's perfect and everybody did all the things right, but like the mutual aid groups that I've seen here in Rochester, everybody from like building little corner food cupboards to setting up Facebook pages for like, hey, I've got diagnosed with COVID. Can somebody please go run and get us groceries?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to go out, and groceries show up. So, a recognition of um, the need for taking care of each other. If that's the thing that we've learned, or that's the thing that has grown because of this,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
What I found from talking to people over the course of the last year is that it's actually been an eye-opening experience, because living in a big city and always having lived my entire life in a big city, my perspective is very much skewed towards that way of thinking. And yet what I've found is every time I talk to somebody who comes from a smaller community, whether it's in the US or it's even, I've spoken to folks in France, who, they're not in Paris, they're 2 hours south of Paris in the French countryside. The little communities did better through this because they're already close, right? Everybody is already used to living in a world where you know your neighbors and you take care of each other, and it's much more personal. And I think one of the challenges of the country that I hope we learn from is a lot of the media and a lot of the decision makers don't come from that environment. They live in the big cities, right, that have the big problems. And so somebody who lives in a 30 miles south of Sacramento in California can deal with the rules to the pandemic differently than people who live in a county that has 40 million people in it, right? They don't have to be mandated to wear a mask all the time. They know when it's the right time to do it because most of the time they're not coming into contact with other people. And so one of the things I've learned just from talking to people in the last year is that having I don't want to play into any of the political memes, right? But I'll use the term coastal elite perspective because I live in one of the big cities on the coast,
Mhm.
is not the way to be. We have to be open and listening to everybody, right? That doesn't mean I want to be, on the other side of the spectrum. I tend to try to ride in the middle, but I've definitely learned that just because we have to do things a certain way here in a place like Los Angeles in order to get through doesn't mean that same rule has to be slammed on the guys who are living in, the Central Valley of California. They have a different life and a different way of contact with each other. And just because they're doing it differently doesn't mean it's wrong. And so,
I think you've
yeah,
got an interesting point there because it really comes down to, I mean, like I was saying here in Rochester, there are, for as much as we are one community, we are an assemblage of multiple communities that overlap. Um, and because of that forced resiliency that we've had to develop because we've been disinvested from,
yeah,
that's that residual skill remains. So
yeah,
when you've got an environment where you can dial up what you need with your your Amex card and a phone,
yeah,
that system breaks down because the people that generally provide that aren't able to. So much for your Amex card. That's not going to
yeah,
get you what you need when you need it.
yeah, yeah,
So if it's, I think recognizing, you know, so if I were at the upper levels of government that were figuring this stuff out, I think there definitely needs to be a deeper appreciation for the need to customize approaches locally,
hmm,
but also making sure that the science is supported, even if
yeah,
it's interpreted slightly differently.
yeah,
Do you meet the same goals in your area? Because obviously, in New York, like there, and I guess a willingness for the public. God, this gets into a whole like scientific literacy like diatribe, but you know, information as it comes. Like this was a situation where information was either unavailable or the latest information might contradict what was previously stated.
yeah.
And that has to be okay.
Yes,
You
you're
know,
absolutely right.
and it's not that we were wrong necessarily, it's that we didn't know.
Yeah,
And now we have a better answer, and aren't you glad you have a better answer now?
yeah,
So you can be frustrated that you had to wear a mask in this scenario or you had to wash your hands for 20 seconds in this scenario and now you don't have to, but really you probably should be washing your hands.
yeah,
But like
yeah,
let's kind of go with like folks having the best of intent,
yeah.
um,
Yes,
and go from
yeah,
there.
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. So, are things getting better? Have things started to turn around for you guys?
Um, yeah, it's been interesting because like a lot of, so we've been hustling the whole time. That's probably the biggest complaint that I have is that like at some point it would be nice to take a break,
Yeah,
but I don't know that I'm going to be able to afford myself the break that I need
yeah,
slash deserve slash whatever because there's this push to catch up or not
yeah,
to lose ground that I fought so hard to hold on to.
yeah,
Um, so one of the things that we started working on over the pandemic was working on creative content that was delivered online. So we started working on a project called Read Along Road, which is basically an educational program so that way, so one of the challenges that's not just in Rochester, it's across the whole entire country is literacy.
Yeah.
uh, and in New York, I think I'm gonna butcher the numbers if I try and quote them, but like I think to be considered, uh, actually I'm gonna look those up after, and I'll give them to you. But basically,
Okay.
that over 60% of people in Rochester over the age of 16 are barely reading at a literate level, literal, oh, geez Louise, are barely
Wow.
reading at a basic level of literacy. So we have to make sure that kids have access to reading content. Like
Yeah.
the parents don't have the ability to read a storybook to their kids comfortably. Their kids aren't being read to, so it's like that sort of perpetuating
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah.
So, and we've got lots of folks that we work with who are entertainers and storytellers. So we're using their skills combined with our video and our animation skills to
Yeah.
create content that has somebody read you a story, online on your phone. So like when the kids,
Yeah.
are able to tune into something, there's some good quality content for them to read.
That's cool. Is that a, I mean, maybe off topic a little, is that an extension of the education system not doing what it's supposed to do? Or is that a change in the way we ingest things, right? Is it
I,
because we watch TV now and don't read books? Or is it
I
because
think it's a
schools just haven't been
multifaceted
doing it?
challenge. Literacy is, you know, I am a privileged white woman who came
Oh,
from privileged family. Like
yeah.
I mean, my grandfather was a tool and die maker. He didn't graduate high school. He got a GED.
Yeah.
He obviously was able to read,
Yeah.
but he made sure, but he also had the resources to make sure that
Yeah.
all of his children went to college. So like I was read to all the time as a child. So
Yeah.
I was reading at 3.
Hmm.
That alone, the exposure to language, the exposure to vocabulary that I had is so much greater than what's available to someone that grew up down the street who didn't have access to those words. So how do you level a playing field when I've been playing since I was 3? Like
Yeah.
that's not fair. And then my kids, I've given them that leg up. So like um we've got to make sure that folks have access to words. Then they can do whatever they want with those words.
Yeah. That makes sense. How are you feeling about the next 6 months?
Curious. Yeah. I mean, curious, optimistic, and exhausted.
Okay. Okay.
um, I'm curious to see, where the business goes. I'm curious to see, like right now it's this sort of like, all right, now we can go back to work. What do we want work to look like now? Now that we're
Yeah.
not hustling, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
And is it the same thing that we wanted to do in January of 2020? You know,
Yeah.
and so what does this life look like?
That's very interesting. I'm going through some of that myself in my world, mostly because I'm historically I show up at the office, I work my 50-hour week sitting in an office somewhere, and then I come home and that's where I try to do my separation between work and my personal life. And now I work in my garage, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly convinced that the company I am working for now will never reopen their offices again because they don't need to, right? And I'm wrestling internally with I don't know how I feel about that. And I don't know whether that means I should be considering other opportunities or I should be figuring out how to adjust myself to get used to the idea. So it's whatever the new normal is going to eventually fully develop out as is an adventure so far. That's scary with all the things that come with wandering into undiscovered country before. We'll have to see what comes out of it.
Well, I think it's easy to point out all of the terrible things, and it's to be like completely lost in the terrible things that happened during COVID, especially if you had either a terrible experience yourself, or lost a family member, or lost a
Yeah,
close friend.
yeah,
Um, but when do you get the opportunity to just do a full stop, whether it was
yeah,
for like 3 days or not, um,
yeah, yeah,
or 3 months or three, and my heart goes out to the folks that are in essential,
yeah,
because
hmm
they haven't had a break,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they were kind of forced into work for the rest of us,
yeah,
at their own risk, because they didn't have access to the means to kind of, you know
yeah,
take
yeah,
care of
and
their families without it. So like,
yeah,
how do we, but with that information, I also like it's also heartening to see, like, these big chain stores and big chain restaurants are having to raise uh,
Yes.
their pay scales because people are saying, nope, I'm not
Yeah.
going. I'm not
Yeah.
doing this. So it's like a general strike without a general
Yeah.
strike.
Yeah. There is definitely something refreshing about seeing people stand up for themselves and saying, "I'm not going to just settle." And I hope that that movement takes and it continues. Right. I hope it doesn't get to a point where all of those people are then forced to go, but I have no choice now because it's either feed my family or take the bad deal. Right. I hope we
And it's
can.
interesting to see how things like that, the pandemic relief that was sent to families,
Yeah.
how that, that $300 can make such a huge difference in people's lives, something that is
Yeah.
so relatively small, quote
Yeah.
unquote.
Yeah.
That means the difference between somebody saying, their house or not. That means the difference
Yeah.
between somebody having healthy food on their plate or not. And why are we not doing this in general?
Yeah, I know. The pandemic has been, I mean, it amplified the disparity more. I mean, that disparity in this country has been there all along, and it's been building and building and building probably for decades. But the last year has kind of put this giant magnifying glass over it and blown it up for the whole world to see how really dramatic it is. Because you're absolutely right. If $300 in a week can make that much of a difference in your life, because so I was out of work for a long time during this. I had gotten laid off just before the holidays in 2019 and didn't find anything until March of 2021. I worked in the entertainment industry. And so once I got to the point where things were starting to open up again in 2020, the entertainment industry shut down because of COVID. And I know what it's like to be on unemployment. And for me, anyway, it was always a long view to a cliff. It was not well, I'm going to stay home because I'm getting an extra $300 and that makes my life better. Because for me, it was always, well, okay, this will give me a little something to keep feeding the family for a couple of weeks longer once I go off the edge of the cliff and it runs out.
Yeah.
Right. Because it was always going to run out. There's always an end to it. It's not like it's just, hey, we're going to pay you now for the rest of your life. So don't worry about it.
I mean, and people
Um,
aren't sitting on that $300. Talking about like
no.
economic investment in the local community. The
Yeah.
people are not the
Yeah.
regular typical folks are not dragons. They don't
Yeah.
sit on hordes of cash. If the money comes in, it's used to make their lives better, which
Yeah.
is generally invested in their community. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. It
all
was.
about it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, what can I be sure that the folks who listen to this know about places to go find your work, the things that are important to you?
Sure. So there's a couple of places you can go online. So airigami.com. So that's
Hmm.
AIRIGAMI, kind of like
Hmm.
origami, but we make it with air. And that features all of our super fantastic giant sculptures made entirely out of balloons. You can check us out on Instagram, on Facebook. We pretty much have, you know, slash origami wherever.
And
Uh,
you do projects everywhere, right? You're not
we
just in local.
Oh yeah, we theoretically we travel the globe making giant installations. I would love to come to your town and build something really cool. Now that we can safely get folks
Yeah,
together, or once we're sure we can safely get folks together, I would love to build something big for you, and actually even have people come together and build things together. Um, I think the magical thing about our work is um, we create wonder. So we were talking all about how, people are divided and people are frustrated with each other and they're not
yeah,
talking to each other. There is nothing like a giant sculpture. People come together
yep,
and stand around each other and point at it and go, "Oh my gosh, do you see that thing right there?" And it doesn't matter if that person comes from one side of town or another, you're all united in wonder. And that's the medium that I like working in, is wonder. And then let's see, shameless self promotion. Oh, you can go to
okay,
readalongroad.com, and we're looking for funding in order to kind of get that off the ground. And you can see a sample of the work that we've created. We've got one video up there with Almeda Whitus, who is a a treasure as far as storyteller, performer. Uh,
Yeah.
you just feel like grandma's reading to you on the couch, and it's just a nice, warm, happy feeling. So if you guys can help us do that, that would be amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, and other than that, just be nice to each other and recognize we're all coming at this from a very different set of experiences and assets and deficits, and I think we all just want to kind of be able to have dinner with our families and maybe some friends and relax every once in a while, and if we recognize that, maybe we'd get along better.
Yep. Good way to go out. Kelly, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
No problem. And then, do you mind if I pulled up the website with those numbers on the one thing, so that way I can sound like I know what the heck I'm talking about?
Oh, sure. No, go right ahead.
So yeah, so in the United States, it turns out that 68% of fourth graders read below grade level. So right here in New York State, anybody or not anybody, we've sorry, right here in New York State, um, an adult reading at a fifth grade level is considered functionally illiterate. So in
Hmm.
Rochester, 57% of our residents age 16 years and older read at a sixth grade level. So that's barely above functional literacy. And literacy is really the key to unlocking so many things from health and wellness and development. It's everything.
Yeah, it is. It's everything. It's being able to understand, right? I mean, there's an irony in it. We live in one of the most fascinating times for availability of information, right? I mean, I carry a device in my pocket that gives me access to all of the collective knowledge of mankind for a millennia, in theory, because we're collecting it all and putting it out. But people have to A, be able to read it, and B, be able to digest it in a way so they can separate the wheat and the chaff, right? Know what,
Well, and not only that, but how much information and how much knowledge are we missing out on because someone can't converse with us
yeah,
in that written format? These
yeah,
are people that are not dumb. These are very smart people,
yeah,
just can't read. So
yeah.
how do we make sure that everybody can?